Hey everyone, Jack here again. Sorry I was gone for so long. It was final season at my school, and now I'm finally back home for the holidays. And today we're going to be talking about role playing in Dungeons and Dragons, specifically role playing for the Dungeon Master. So we're going to be talking about how to role play as a DM to actually get your players immersed into the story and make them feel like they're in that world rather than they're just sitting at a table with you. So I'm going to start with talking about what's the reason we'd want to be immersed in D&D. So the reason we'd want to be immersed in D&D is because if you're at the table with your friends and you're all just sitting around and you don't actually feel like you're in the game, it can detract for some people. Obviously, there are some people who don't need to feel like they're in the game and they actually like the idea that D&D is a game and they play it like it's a board game or a video game or something like that. And for them, it's perfectly fine to not be immersed in the story. But for a lot of people, what sets D&D apart from games such as Assassin's Creed or God of War is that the game actually feels like you are part of the universe and the universe is a living, breathing place. And a good way to make the universe feel real is to make the people inside the universe feel real. And the way the DM can do this is by implementing a couple different role-playing techniques when they are at the table. So like in one of my other videos, I talked about NPCs for a little bit. NPCs shouldn't be too outlandish all of the time. They should behave like normal people. Try to keep them more conservative and reserved than you would even imagine a normal person would be. Because oftentimes when playing D&D, we have this tendency to exaggerate how we're feeling and make everyone such a characterful person where they're constantly doing something different than what a normal person would do. But if you really think about it, normal people behave quite simply most of the time, and they're almost invisible and unremarkable. So like, let's say that the players interact with a shopkeep or a townsperson just for one or two interactions throughout the campaign. Instead of having that person have this weird and outlandish personality, if you just tone that down a little bit and you just have them behave like a normal person, the characters may forget about that character that they interacted with, but they will remember that the world feels more real. And obviously, I'm not saying get rid of all characterful characters, because without them, like, the normal people don't just seem normal, and it really takes away from things. But I want to limit the amount of characterful people you have in your world. So in my current campaign, I actually have a wizard in the game who is the most characterful person I've put in there. And the whole thing he has going on is that he constantly changes clothes to fit what the situation is. And that's weird and that's odd. And he is really the only person. Obviously, there's some other people that are a little different than normal, but for the most part, everyone else is pretty standard, vanilla, like, fantasy universe. I'm not saying that you should make 99% of everyone vanilla, but it is what's working in my campaign right now. And so I'm just relaying that information to you. But them being vanilla and kind of boring normal townsfolk doesn't mean that they have to be really boring for the characters to interact with. Obviously, they still have a character inside them. They're still like a person who has feelings and emotions, and they're going to act slightly differently than the next person they're going to interact with. But make that type of interaction that they have a smaller difference from the other characters. So in that same world with the wizard, I have a general store owner, and the general store owner's main thing is that she doesn't really like the adventurers. And it's not that she completely distrusts them, she just thinks that they bring more trouble than they're worth. And so she calls them rat catchers. I actually stole that idea from Matthew Colville. I heard him use that term once or twice in one of his videos, and I stole it and have been using it in my campaigns, and it makes the shopkeep stand out a little bit, but my players almost forget about it when they move on. Whereas with the wizard, they don't ever forget about the wizard. They're constantly in their head thinking, oh, the wizard. Whereas with the shopkeep, they're thinking, oh, let's go to the general store and get some stuff we need. And then they interact with her again, and they're like, oh yeah, this lady. So the NPCs can be memorable, but they shouldn't all be over-the-top personalities. So that's one of the tips I have for creating the NPCs you're going to play. But when it comes to the actual role play, a lot of people get nervous and they're unsure about what they're going to do, and they feel like they're going to look stupid in front of their friends. And I'm not going to tell you you're not going to look stupid, because the first time you're going to look stupid, the second time you're going to look stupid. But if you keep looking stupid in front of your friends and you keep doing it, people are they're going to enjoy it. They're going to laugh at you at first and they're not going to know what's going on. But there's going to be someone in the group who's really going to be enjoying the fact that you're role playing the characters. And if you can just get over that, get over the fact that you're going to look stupid the first couple times, then you can start to explore role playing much better. Because while your friends may think, oh, you're being stupid right now, they are your friends and they'll get over it. Like, they're not going to be like, oh, you did a stupid little character, now we're no longer friends with you. If they're friends with you and they've decided to play D&D with you, they've already decided to do something that is abnormal and a little weird. I mean, obviously it's becoming more popular to play D&D, but still they're, doing something that's a little weird already. So if you just throw a little extra on top of it, they may laugh at you, but they'll overcome that, and then they'll realize that it's adding a lot to the story. And so what role-playing really does for you is it brings your adventure from, oh, so the shopkeep tells you that you can go do this, or the shopkeep tells you you can buy the item. Whereas now with role-playing, you can have the shopkeep talk to them. You can talk to them in character. You can be like, oh, why hello there, adventurers. How can I help you? And that slight change really changes how immersive the entire world is, right? So if they are interacting with the shopkeep and you're narrating what the shopkeep says, but from a third person view, it feels less like the shopkeep is a real person and more like the shopkeep is an NPC. They can realize, oh, the shopkeep is kind of running on this script. Whereas if you are in the character and then they're talking to the character of the shopkeep, they will feel like they're actually in that world rather than they're interacting with an NPC in that world. A big thing is getting the players to feel like they're not interacting with NPCs and that they're interacting with real people in the world, because that's kind of the overall goal of role-playing and getting the characters immersed, is making them feel like this world is real. And if you are new to role-playing and your players are also new to role-playing and they're not role-playing, the best way to get them to role-play is for you yourself to do it. Because the player is going to have a hard time role-playing when the NPCs aren't being role-played. So if you as a DM are just narrating from a third-person perspective of what the NPCs are saying and doing, then the characters are going to have a hard time actually getting into character, and they'll feel that same awkwardness that you feel when you start playing the characters. And if you are a good DM, I think you should help your players overcome that feeling of awkwardness by breaking the ice yourself and doing it yourself. One time when I was just getting into DMing, I was DMing Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and for the section of the book when the players decided to build their own little tavern, we had a grand opening party where all of the players invited all of the NPCs that they had met and all the high-ranking NPCs they knew, and they also invited some of the common town folk to come and just enjoy the night. And so this was one of the first times I had actually had to role play a big event. So rather than just role playing a shopkeep and then moving on to just narrating things, I was actually having to narrate many NPCs interacting with each other. And so it kind of brought back that old feeling of awkwardness of having to role play the characters, because now I was kind of stepping up my role playing game. Whereas with the shopkeep, you're just doing one NPC to characters, and so you have the players to interact with. But with role-playing many NPCs interacting with each other, you have to come up with how they would speak in your head. And that's it's harder than normal role-playing, because you actually have to get into what the characters are thinking, because you are the only person talking to yourself. And it's almost like you're a mentally ill schizophrenic person, because you're having a conversation with yourself and you have to interact with these two sides of the conversation as if they don't know what the other person is about to say, even though you do. And that brought back that old feeling of awkwardness. But once I really got over that, my players actually really enjoyed it, and they still talk about it today. And it's been almost a year and a half since we actually did that event. And the reason I'm making this video is because one of my friends, when I was talking about video ideas, said, oh, remember that party you role played where you role played with yourself for an hour and a half and we all just kind of sat there and watched, that was really entertaining. You should talk about how to role play. And I'd say my main piece of advice is just getting over that awkwardness, because that initial awkwardness is really the main thing holding you back. Now, obviously, you're going to want some tips on how to actually get into the character's head and know how a character would act differently than you. And what I can suggest for that is knowing what the character is trying to do in that exact moment. So if it's a shopkeep, he's trying to sell things to the players, trying to get as much money as possible so he can feed his family. And that's a pretty simple motive, but it's a thing that happens often in the game, and so I'm going to use it as that example. So like, you know what the shopkeep wants to do. He wants to sell items. So if you want to role play him more than just, yes, we sell that item, here it is, and then take the money, you can change and have him like try to upsell the characters. That's not out of the box. Like, that's not a crazy character who the players are going to remember forever, but it's just something that makes the world feel that much more real, because the shopkeep is being like, oh, well, you like this sword? How about I sell you the sharpening kit that comes with it? And it makes the character feel like a real person doing a real job. Whereas if you didn't understand their motive, you may not have thought of what they would do in that situation. Expanding on this idea of motivation to a broader level, you may end up role-playing villains. And villains have many different complicated motivations, and obviously I think that could be a whole separate conversation with a whole video on its own. But when you know what the villain's motivation is, let's say he wants to enslave the town to help bolster his workforce to build a portal to a different dimension so that he can free his chained up god. Well, you know what he wants to do. So you know why he is doing what he's doing, and you know how he's going about it because you've planned the villain ahead of time. Then you can actually think about how he would react when the players are talking to him and when they're interfering with his plan. So, you know, if they're killing his lieutenants, he may send a message to them, and based on his motives, he may explain himself differently. He may not explain himself at all, just threaten the players, or any different combination of things you could think of. It's really all about understanding what the character wants in that exact situation and how they're going to convey themselves to get it. You can then add on top of that different characteristics that you see in the real world, such as being a timid person, being a charismatic person, being a loud person, being a quiet person, being a jolly person, being a sad person. You can just add these characteristics on top of them, and I would say sticking with that idea of keeping the characters not too out there, you only give them one or maybe two different characteristics if you don't want this to be a flamboyant or out-of-the-box character. Obviously, if you want them to be an out-of-the-box memorable character, you can add many personality traits and have a more complex motive and backstory that influences how they behave. But for a simple shopkeep, barkeep, or random townsfolk, maybe add like timid or strong or charismatic, but don't add too many of them on top, because then they start to become a mismatch of different characteristics, and it kind of is too much for the players to take on and kind of breaks the immersion. Now, one more thing I want to talk about is that roleplay doesn't just have to be one character talking to the players or another character. It can be something more simple, such as writing letters or contacting the players in some way that isn't direct conversation. So I'd say that writing a letter still counts as some form of roleplay, and it may be a good gateway into actually getting into what the characters want and thinking about how the characters would speak, as opposed to how you, the DM, would narrate them speaking. It takes off that pressure of having to actually have the players talk back to you, and you have to think of a response on your feet, because it's just a letter and they can't respond. They'll have to just sit there and ponder, and then you have way more time to think about how to respond to how they're responding, because you aren't going to have to respond in that exact moment. And doing that can really help you get into this idea of how to play the character and how to role play them without having to be too overwhelmed all at once. I'd say that role playing is just one part of getting the characters immersed into D&D and getting them immersed into the story, but I think it's the most crucial part. I may make some more videos on different things that I think can help immerse the characters, such as having a world with consistent rules and having a history of the world written out, maybe just a small history to have some idea of what's happened prior, and other things like that. But that would all fit more into a campaign building or a world building video. I may end up doing one of those later if you guys would want that, and you can leave that in the comments if you think that'd be a good idea, or maybe I'll put up a poll on the channel. I don't know. I have a couple more videos that I'm going to do before that anyway, so if you leave a comment down below about whether or not I should do a world building video, that'd be great. But I'd say the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to role playing is those characterful characters I've been talking about. So you're going to have one or two, or, obviously as many as you want in the world, but I'm recommending like one or two. And when it comes to role playing them, you're going to want to make them distinct in a way that's fun, but you don't have to make them necessarily in a way that is completely agreeable with the characters. So they don't have to always be a friendly NPC. They can be an antagonist. I've always found that making an antagonist the flamboyant or out-of-the-box character becomes a little bit more difficult because they obviously are going to be butting heads with the player characters, and if they ever end up interacting in a game about fighting monsters, players typically have this inclination to always get into a fight, so they may end up killing that character, and that may cause some problems because they won't get to show off the fact that they're very characterful in some way. But if you have a way that you can prevent them from killing a antagonist NPC that is characterful, you can do that. Maybe kind of thinking about it, I could see a way where you could have them like in a city or some civilized area where they can't get away with killing this guy because maybe they haven't actually broken any laws, and so the players don't want to kill them because they don't want to get on the wrong side of the law. Or maybe they have a patron who's telling them not to kill this guy because they mean something to them. But for whatever reason, if you can come up with one, the antagonist can be a characterful and flamboyant character. But I've always found that friendly NPCs work a little bit better because you can have them interacting with the players and have them behaving in a way that the characters are wanting to interact with them more. The most important thing about role-playing this characterful person is keeping them consistent within themselves. So it's kind of like when I was talking about keeping the world consistent. Keeping the character consistent is all about immersion and role-playing them, because obviously people in the real world, unless they have something wrong with them, aren't typically randomly changing how they behave for no apparent reason. Obviously, a characterful person can be changing the way they behave, but understanding their motive is a very important part of that. For example, the NPC in my campaign that I've been talking about, the wizard who's constantly changing clothes, the reason he's doing that and changing his clothes to fit the occasion is because it makes him memorable. He knows it makes him memorable, and he likes that because he wants the players and the town to be interacting with him constantly so that he can be getting new and unique information from many different people. And he knows if he behaves in this outlandish way, people will interact with him more, and so he gets more information. That's just an illustration of what you can do, but having good understanding of the character's motives is a very important way to piece together why they behave the way they do, and it can make them much more believable when you're interacting with the players, and having them be much more believable will make the role-playing that much easier. So when it comes down to it, I'd say the two most important things about role-playing are getting over that initial embarrassment and understanding the motives of the characters you're playing. Because if you do those two things, I think you'll be 90% of the way to knowing how to role play. If you have any other ideas on how to do role playing for DMs, or maybe even some ideas on how to role play a player character, leave that down in the comments below so that we can all learn from this video. Maybe I'll even go down in the comments and learn something that I didn't even think about. I think that's all I have for today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, can you leave it a like? And if you want to see more content like this in the future, hit that subscribe button. I hope this video was helpful for any DMs who are looking to getting into role-playing for their table. And I hope you have a great day, week, month, and year.